I don't know if anyone thought that Project Runway would end up being a hit show.
This is Project Runway.
Make it work.
This disappoints me.
I have two pieces of advice. Don't make dumb clothes.
That's the fabric?
And don't make jokes. There's a huge playing field, and there are not many people who design well for it. I don't care what you design, as long as your model can get into a taxi. Kate, thank you, and you're a fantastic therapist.
Really?
You took me on a journey I haven't been on for decades.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to Post Run High. I'm sitting here today with the iconic and legendary Tim Gunn.
You flatter me. Good heavens, what an introduction. Thank you.
Tim, I'm seriously so excited to have you on the show today. I feel like I grew up knowing who you are and watching you. And I alluded to this earlier when we were doing our walk, but I actually was considering Parsons for a school like very closely. So it's so cool to be able to sit down with you and just know how much of an impact you had on Parsons as a university.
Well, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here and honored to be here, and I look forward to a wonderful conversation here.
The premise of Post Run High is we always do some sort of activity before the sit-down interview. You and I started out by doing a walk in Brooklyn. So first, I just want to ask, is fitness a big part of your life? Has it been for years?
Well, I have to say I do feel grounded through movement, but for me, it's something fairly recent. 9 years ago, I met this dynamic individual named Tim Morehouse. He's a three-time Olympian and a silver medalist in fencing, saber fencing. And he said he had just opened a fencing club, and I asked, what's a fencing club? I had no idea. Place you fence and have a drink. He said, it's on 91st Street. I said, 91st Street? I live on 90th. It's directly behind my apartment building. So I went over to see him, and I was really enraptured with the activity. So at age 62, I took up fencing.
I find that so interesting because I was saying I just did an interview with Chris Cuomo last week, and we're in the edit right now, editing our conversation, and he talked a lot about getting into self-defense and sparring at a later age in life, and I find it fascinating. And I have brothers that love jujitsu, the kind of combat type of workouts, like the fighting, people love. But fencing's an interesting one. I haven't heard that one before.
Well, it's a fascinating sport with a long, long history. It originated in France, and of course it came out of dueling. But with fencing, you're not supposed to harm the other person.
No.
You get penalized.
Mm-hmm. Although sometimes it hurts.
Oh, well, sometimes, yes. But then you've done something wrong. And I didn't know I would fall in love with it, and I did. And Tim Morehouse said to me, we really need to work on making you stronger. So he introduced me to a trainer, Jason, and I've been working with him for 8 years now, and we work out twice a week. So I've become a bit of a fitness nut.
I love
but
that.
I will say this. I'm going to contradict you about the post-workout high. I need a post-workout nap.
Okay,
it's
that's
not a
yes.
high.
No, and I do have to say, it depends on what the workout is. If I'm doing some sort of a lifting workout or a HIIT workout, I'm the same way. I'm napping afterwards because I rarely move my body like that. But after a run or a walk, I feel like it's just something I've been doing for so many years. And I feel like a walk is probably the most common thing. You do feel that rush of endorphins, and you feel kind of this sense of accomplishment.
Well, and in fact, after my fitness training, I walk for about an hour because it cools me down and reinvigorates me, and I agree. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into it.
Wonderful.
Because as I was doing my research on you and learning all about you, I really found the trajectory of your life to be so interesting. And what I love to do in my interviews is just get to know somebody from the ground up. You grew up in Washington, D.C.
I did. My father was an FBI agent, and he was a very talented writer. And I should say he spent his first, was it 1 year or 2 years, in the field office in Newark, New Jersey. And then he was transferred to headquarters. And somehow J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director then, and he was the director through 5 presidents, learned of Dad's talented writing. And he ended up being Hoover's ghostwriter. He wrote all of his books, his correspondence, his speeches. and he traveled with him.
You know what? It actually makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a really interesting point, because it's like when you think about somebody that's in the FBI or working a job in politics or in the government or even like in the military, which I kind of associate like the FBI to be like a little bit of a similar mentality.
Yeah.
It's like you don't necessarily think of, oh, this person might actually be very creative and a good writer, but it makes sense that you had those kind of traits in your family, right? Because you're a very creative person.
Well, and I'm very, very lucky that my parents nurtured that, cultivated it. And my mother, until I was born, was a librarian. In fact, she started the CIA's library.
Growing up in a family where, you know, it's very government oriented, was creativity something that was like fostered in your household, or was that something that you kind of carved out for yourself at a young age?
I think it was largely my doing. I was a very reclusive, nerdy kid. I had only a select number of friends. I didn't participate in team sports. I didn't like them. I was a competitive swimmer. I loved swimming. But I loved reading. I loved Lego. I still remember when it came out in the 1950s. And when it first came out, these were just anonymous bricks. You could do whatever you wanted with them. And I used to spend most of my allowance money buying Lego. And I still remember when doors and windows came out and roof tiles. I was ecstatic because I was just leaving holes in buildings, pretending it was a door or a window. Mm-hmm. And suddenly there's the real thing. It was thrilling. I was a creative kid, and I was teased and abused about that with some frequency. But everything makes us who we are.
And then you went on in college, post high school, you went to an art school.
I did.
And you were studying sculpture art.
Initially, I wanted to be a painter. And having grown up in Washington, a city where there are lots and lots of museums and entry is free, I mean, you have this immediate access to all of this work. I thought that means museums all over the world are free. No, they're not. My point is just that I really revered painting. And when I was in school, I had to take a three-dimensional design class. And I resisted, and I had a big debate with my advisor about, why am I doing this? I have absolutely no interest in it. Well, you're doing it because I'm telling you have to do it. And it was a kind of epiphany for me, because I was really good at three-dimensional thinking. And I put painting on the shelf. I mean, I still painted, but I really dove into sculpture. And when I graduated and was a starving artist, I ended up making a living by building architectural models for three firms in Washington.
It makes sense that you then went on and like still liked doing something that was maybe a little different than painting, but similar in a lot of ways, and still using your hands.
Yes.
It's very technical.
My grandmother used to say, why are you doing this? You do such good things with your hands. Become a doctor.
It's so different. I actually grew up oil painting as well, so I can completely relate to like being like, oh, I might want to pursue this. But, you know, what's really interesting to me about what you just said was you loved museums growing up.
Yes.
And it makes a lot of sense, because didn't you go on also post-college and you were working at a museum in the education department?
Well, I was teaching at a museum school, and also working in the museum in the installation area. But do you know the earliest stage of my career as an educator?
Tell me.
A dear mentor who became an incredibly close friend, a woman by the name of Rona Slade, she reached out to me to say, I'm teaching a high school summer class, 6 weeks, 5 days a week, and I need an assistant. Would you like to do it? And I thought, oh, good heavens, of course, I'd love to. And I would have done anything for Rona. So we did the class. I loved every second of it. My first experience in a classroom in that capacity. And Rona called me about a month later, and she said, I just had someone drop out who was teaching three-dimensional design, and I want you to do it. And I said, oh, thank you. I'd love to do it. I'll come right over. So the first day, and then it ended up being the first week of classes, I would throw up in the school's parking lot every single morning.
'Cause
I
you were
was such a
nervous?
wreck. And I would have to brace myself up against the wall of the classroom because my knees would be shaking so badly. I would fear that I would tumble over.
And why? Just
Just
nerves.
unconditional, unabridged panic. So I spent that week rehearsing How to Quit. And I took the speech that I had rehearsed to Rona. It was in her office. We were sitting like this. And she's listening to me, nodding. And she said, well, I trust that this will either kill you or cure you. And I'm counting on the latter. Good day. I thought, oh no, I've got to come back and do this again. But part of my nervousness was feeling that I needed to be the answer person, that whatever the students asked or whatever they wanted to explore, I had to be the expert. And this is a slow evolution. It wasn't until about the third or maybe even the fourth year of teaching that I came to terms with this. And I just said to myself, this is ridiculous. You can't possibly know everything. And this was before Google existed, or I could have gone into a back room and said, well, let's Google this, and I'll go and pretend that I knew the answer. So I made the decision to turn it back on the students and to say, great question. I want each of you to research this and come back to the next class with an answer that you think no one else will have found, so that we don't get all this boilerplate stuff. It's the same old answer every time. And it really worked. And I then began each semester by declaring to the students, you are doing the heavy lifting in this class, not me. I'm putting 70% of the work here on your heads. And you need to get used to that. And the other thing, this is also a non sequitur, but I would say to them, I want you to know that in my world, the squeaky wheel does not get greased. So don't even think about squeaking.
Oh my gosh. And what do you think it was about that style of teaching that was so effective that you were like, this is working?
Well, the students felt invested in their own education and in the outcome of what we were doing in that class. And they didn't feel as though they were just a sponge soaking all this stuff up. They were responsible for a lot of the stuff. I also really believed in then, and believe in even stronger now, that dialogue is critically important in a classroom. If you have some pedantic teacher who just talks at you all the time, I think it's numbing. It's not even remotely engaging.
It's like active learning in a way, right? Because you're participating in the conversation. But I can imagine, based on classes that I've been in college, that the hardest job for a teacher is figuring out how to create an environment that facilitates conversations among students.
It's true.
You know, going in as a teacher, okay, here are the confidence students that are going to raise their hands all the time. They love to talk. But then there's the students, like I was definitely one of these students that was like afraid to raise my hand and talk.
I was too. I was the same.
Right? So like, what did you do in those situations as a teacher to kind of get those people to maybe break out of their shell?
In a studio situation, it's very different from a desk situation. In a studio situation, physically, you don't feel that there's this hierarchy of who's closest to the teacher in a way, or to the podium, because as an instructor, I'm always walking around, walking, and giving everybody equal time. And also in that kind of capacity, you can have a one-on-one. It's so easy. I mean, it's like what you see on Project Runway. But when it's a different kind of class, it's not a studio class. It's I won't call it a lecture because I don't do that. But a lecture style.
Yeah.
I would have the students arrange their desks in a circle. I would sit at one of those desks in the circle too, and we'd conduct the class. So everybody has the same line of vision, in a manner of speaking. There's no one who's at the front of the class versus being at the back of the class, and it worked. But it has to do with the physical environment, with what do you do with chairs or tables or desks that creates a kind of democracy of sorts.
Absolutely. I love that idea, though, the circle table for a lecture. I think that's so smart.
I will also share with you, though, Kate,
yeah.
This was true teaching. This was true in Project Runway. I am the worst person when it comes to first impressions.
Why?
That person you think, oh, they're never going to mount anything, they're never going to do anything. They end up rising and being the cream. And the person you think, oh, this person's going to run away with it, then they end up disappointing you.
I want to talk about that as well in the context of fashion, because I feel like that's probably a common theme in those kinds of classrooms. There are some people that I think don't have the same level of raw talent
Absolutely.
as others,
You're
but
right.
They're harder workers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, I will use my niece as an example of that. My niece and my nephew couldn't be more different, completely and totally different. My niece is a workaholic. She did well in school because she really worked hard. My nephew tested off the charts and was a lazy, good-for-nothing bum and did really badly. And I sat on the admissions committee at Parsons for a number of years, and I was the champion of the underdog because most faculty on an admissions committee only want the stars. Well, yeah, because then you don't have to work very hard. They're self-starters, they'll do all this on their own, and you can just sit in the back of the studio and smoke a cigarette or whatever. So when we would have someone whose portfolio was raw, but you'd look at where they're from some place in Alaska with 60 people. Look what they're doing with this. They've never been to a museum. And I was proud that I was the champion of those individuals. And if they, in fact, came to Parsons, generally speaking, they did really, really well because they were so thrilled to be in this environment that nurtured them and that exposed them to things that they hadn't been exposed to before. And as a teacher, that's the most exciting thing in the world. When you see someone have an epiphany about who they can be and what they can become, and they take charge of that, it's thrilling.
I think being a teacher, and you can attest for, it's like one of the most rewarding careers.
It is.
Because over those 4 years and then beyond, you really see somebody grow so much into themselves. Let's talk about this, because you went from studying sculpture in college to then getting to be who you are, that one of the most influential people in the fashion industry and somebody that so many call a mentor. It's incredible. So like, let's talk about
how did that happen?
How did you first, like, walk me through, like, when did you get the call, or did you interview for Parsons? Like, how'd you first get the admissions role?
The Parsons people knew me from conferences, and we would probably see each other, be in the same room together, maybe 2 to 3 times a year. And I had been teaching at the Corcoran for 5 years, so that was a lot of exposure. And they liked me, I'm happy to say, and I was in awe of them. I mean, they were at Parsons, they were in New York. So they called in the summer of 1982 to offer me a teaching position in 3D design. And I said, very flattered, thank you very much. No, thank you. I'm very happy here. Well, in the next year, my life changed. And I didn't know they were going to call again, but they did. And 2 weeks later, I was living in New York. It was very abrupt, and it was very intimidating and very difficult. I moved here in August of 1983, the end of August, right before classes began. And I have to tell you, by Thanksgiving, I thought, I don't think I can do this. I think I need to go back to Washington. This is just not working for me. And I had a fellow teacher whom I got to know pretty well, Ellen, who said to me, I've lived here my whole life. And she said, you have to know something. She said, every emotion that anyone can experience, they experience here to the nth degree. It's on steroids, whatever it is. If it's sadness, it's the saddest anyone's ever been. If they're high, it's the highest anyone's ever been. So she said, you take all this, you put it in a bowl, and you mix it in with a huge amount of sexual libido, and that's New York. And
I love that.
It was a relief. I thought, okay, I get it. Mm-hmm. And it was like a long-distance runner hitting the wall. Suddenly, everything was okay.
And now you've grown to love New York City 41 years
41
later,
years
right?
later.
No, it's incredible. And I am so impressed by the people that come from different cities, different states, and make it in New York City, because it's not easy.
It's not easy. Yeah. And a lot of people don't make it. They make the decision to leave. Yeah, it's a tough place. It really is. But once you do hit the wall, it spoils you. There's no other place like it. And it's really wonderful. So let me tell you the fashion story. I'm at Parsons. I'm teaching three-dimensional design to freshmen, foundation year students, so they haven't chosen a major. So I'm teaching across disciplines, and I love that. I mean, I love the fact that the students, they probably knew what they wanted to major in, but they had not declared a major yet. So it was a cross-disciplinary course. And I was serving on the admissions committee. There must have been something about me that the dean of the school at that time saw, but a decision was made to make me associate dean of the school.
How old were you at this time? Like, I feel like this
Well, I moved here when I was 30.
Wow.
So I was probably 40.
So young.
I didn't know exactly what the responsibilities would entail because I have to say, there was another associate dean, Leslie Cadman. She was really the academic dean. And my role, I'll tell you how I described it, I was the pooper scooper. I was the person who went into academic departments that were floundering or having a moment of crisis, and I had to fix it. We were looking for a new chair of the fashion department, and the department had a crisis of leadership of sorts. There had been a chair for 25 years. When he left, he was replaced by someone who only lasted 3 months. It's a big job, and at the time, arguably the most important department at Parsons. So we hired someone that no one was very keen about, but he had a high profile, and when the senior administration, the three of us, came to terms with the fact that he really couldn't do the job, the ridiculous decision was made that I would be his shadow, that I would go to the department with him, and I would actually do the work. So that was August of 2000. And I'd been there for maybe 3 months. 3 months is a common denominator in many of these things. And I wrote a State of the Union to the dean saying, this place is hemorrhaging. This place is the biggest mess I could ever imagine. And I'll summarize it for you. It was a culture of infantilization. The faculty were infantilized by the administration and by this program called the Designer Critic Program, which is a whole other story. The students were infantilized by the faculty. Other than the faculty, no one had a voice. You go into a critique, the students aren't participating. They're ciphers. They're just sitting there while the teacher carries on and on and on, but not about the clothes, not about the design. Things like, if you put a little more shadow under this eye, it's going to make the face pop. I'm thinking, who gives a damn about the face?
Yeah.
I care about the clothes.
Right.
What's happening here?
Which is what they're in school for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow.
in addition to the place hemorrhaging, I said, this is not a design school. I said, this place is a dressmaking school. And I was intent upon making change. And I said to the dean, we can't bring someone in from the outside. It will take them, God only knows how much time to understand how wrong this is, because the school had such a great reputation. The department did. And more than 70% of the designers on 7th Avenue were Parsons educated. But I also said, this is like the monkeys and the typewriters. You give 1,000 monkeys, 1,000 typewriters for 1,000 years, and someone's going to write the next great novel. And also that first year, there wasn't much that I could do. The budget's set, the faculty contracts are out, the curriculum's set. I mean, you really can't do anything except observe and ask a ton of questions. And most of the questions I would ask the faculty had the following answer. Well, that's the way we've always done it. Oh, that's the other thing. I was the only person who wasn't Parsons educated. So they all were regurgitating what they'd experienced. Oh, also, it's 2000. There's not a computer in the department. No, we don't believe in that newfangled stuff. There wasn't a fashion history class. Oh, we don't want the students to be influenced. What? We have a responsibility to give them a history of their discipline. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So for the new students coming in the following year, 2001, sorry, I spent the summer with a group of faculty rewriting the entire program. And before doing that, we'll go back to the 2000-2001 academic year, I met with the rising seniors, the students who were then juniors. And there was this very well-known program called the Designer Critic Program that would pair, well, not really pair, 6 to 8 students would work with Donna Karan, Mark Jacobs, Tom Ford, and that designer critic would oversee the development of a collection. I said, you've all come here, I'm certain, revering the Designer Critic Program and eager to participate in it. Yeah. Mm. So how would you respond if I were to tell you that I want it to go away? There was dead silence. Well, don't you want to know what you'd be doing? Yeah, what would we be doing? And at this point, there's 70 students who are seniors. You will design and execute a collection of 10 to 12 looks over the course of these 2 semesters, and that will be your senior year experience. Well, they were ecstatic. They were cheering, they were applauding, they were on their feet. I said, wait a minute, who's terrified? No hands went up. I said, you should all be terrified, because in fact, what I'm tossing at you or throwing at you is something that you're really underprepared for. And I said, but I believe in you, and I believe in your aptitude and your capabilities, but you have been under-challenged. Everyone's been working hard, but no one's been working smart.
You really had to get into the weeds and say, this is what's not working, this is what is working, and be able to implement that when you're dealing with teachers that have been there for so many years.
I know.
It's very hard to invite change.
It's changing a culture, which is I mean, it's easy in a way to change course content, but changing a culture, especially a culture that is all about infantilization, where the faculty voice is the only voice that the students ever hear. They never hear their own. So I have to say, part of what propelled me forward was an anger about how could this have happened, and why is it being perpetuated? And we have, and also my huge respect for the students. We have a responsibility to these young people, and we need to do what's best for them. And I think the fact that I'm not a fashion designer and didn't have a fashion education was a huge asset, because I didn't have an axe to grind. I didn't have a particular point of view other than quality. I didn't have a taste other than quality, as opposed to, well, I'm going to make you into a mini-me. In some ways, it corresponded with Project Runway. Project Runway was born in 2004.
4 years after becoming the chairman of the fashion department. Wow.
So Project Runway couldn't have happened in the 90s. And when we think about American fashion, up until 1990-ish, it was a very narrowly defined aesthetic swath. And by the time we reach the late 80s, it's Donna Karan, it's Calvin Klein, it's Ralph Lauren, and that's about it, at least in America. Then American fashion goes into a period of crisis, a crisis of identity. It doesn't know who it is or what it is. And when it comes out of it in the second half of the 90s, it suddenly is a completely different place. It's a place that wants to cultivate and nurture young entrepreneurial designers. That allowed me to say, well, this is what we have to do with this department. We need to be educating students who can lead this department as designers, not as assistant designers. This was such a new approach for the department that a lot of students were very frozen. They just didn't know what to do. And for me, unsticking them, getting them out of that frozen state was relatively easy. Ask them, who's the customer? Who's going to wear these designs? And that really helped enormously. Who are you putting them on? If this is at Saks Fifth Avenue, who's hanging next to it? Mm-hmm. So what department are you in? Mm-hmm. But for the most part, those students were few and far between. Most of the students knew what they wanted to do and who they wanted to be. I have to tell you one other thing about my evolution with fashion.
Yeah, I need to know. Because in 2000, what was your relationship with fashion?
I was wearing baggy Brooks Brothers suits.
Okay. And now you're so known for your,
Well,
your
that's a whole other story,
style.
though. So I will say proudly, Diane von Furstenberg has been a dear friend for a long time, before fashion, because she was a board member. She was a board member at Parsons, and I was managing the board, so I got to know her well, and we liked each other, and we would get together for lunch, and she's just a great person. So the first time she came to see me in the fashion department, we're sitting in my office. I'm borrowing a phrase from I Love Lucy. She looked like she just walked into the grand ballroom and smelled raw cauliflower cooking. I looked at her and I said, "What's the matter?" She gestured. She said this. She said, "This isn't working."
That's me right now. Like in this setting, guys. Everybody looking, that is me right now.
No, it's not. You look stunning and adorable. She said, "You need to be more modern." She said, "You need to be more modern for the students, for the industry, and for yourself." So I had a major transformation. I started wearing all black, and I got a black turtleneck sweater, a black leather blazer, black pants, and that was my uniform. And I wore it all the time, and she approved. But my real fashion epiphany was completely unrelated in a way. I had a minor role in the 2009, or was it 11? I think 2009 movie, The Smurfs. Rita Ryak was the costumer for the show. So we had a conversation before we started filming, and she said, "Oh, you're Tim Gunn. I wouldn't dream of telling you how to dress." So I brought my own wardrobe, of course, which I always do, and we taped that day, and she called me that night, and she said, "I just looked at the rushes." She said, "Your wardrobe isn't good enough." I was mortified. She said,
I'd be so excited, though. I'd be like, transform it for me.
No.
No.
So she said, tomorrow, we weren't taping the next day. She said, "Meet me at this tailor at such and such a time." So I did, and I'm in the dressing room, and I'm looking at the labels. The shirt was $450. The tie was $150. This is 2009. Suits $3,000. I said, "I'm not wearing this. I'm not putting these things on." "Put them on. You put them on." She's screaming at me, and everything had to do with pattern mixing. And I said, "I look like a circus clown. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to go on camera dressed like this." "You are. You're going to do it." So it's a bit like hitting the wall as a long distance runner.
Yeah.
I hit the wall. And I thought, I really like this. This is good. The trouble is, once the show was over, how do I sustain this? That wardrobe I loved. Now I have to shop for it. So I would go to Barney's and Bergdorf's and Saks, and I would feel physically ill when I left, having spent so much money.
Yeah, you grew up with a humble background.
Yeah.
Your dad's in the FBI, parents are in the government, and then it's like all of a sudden fashion is expensive, right? And it's an investment. Trust me. Tell my fiance. My fiance's like, "What is net-a-porter? What is forward?"
Well, at this time, Eric Wilson, who was then fashion critic for The Times, wrote an article about this new store. No one pays me to say any of this. They don't give me free stuff. A store called Suit Supply originated in the Netherlands. It had been in Europe for 30 years. They just opened a store in New York. He said, "If you're that guy going to Bergdorf's and Barney's and Saks, you need to check this out." I thought, oh, come on. This is too good to be true. So I went to Suit Supply. I was in awe and totally enraptured by the place and by the prices. I mean, it was really affordable.
They are. They still are. They're great prices for men.
Yeah, and every single salesperson is an expert in fit. They have to spend a month or more in the Netherlands with the tailors. So they won't let you leave with something off the rack. You've got to put it on. They have to see how you look in it. And my whole wardrobe now, practically, the only thing I'm wearing that Suit Supply are the pants and the shoes.
I love these pants. They're
I do
so
too.
cool. Because when
Yeah.
you look closely at them, they have like little specks of color.
Orange and green, and
When you were doing Project Runway, you didn't feel like you were as fashionable then?
Oh,
Or
no. I mean,
really?
well, I was wearing what I would wear to a design class.
Right. Okay. So you had your uniform. And
Yeah, and also, I was never intended to be on camera.
Right.
I was the consultant to the show.
Let's talk about that. Like, how do you go from Dean of the School of Fashion at Parsons to then being so involved in pop culture with Project Runway and, you know, the Smurfs, and I know you designed an outfit for Barbie.
I don't know if anyone thought that Project Runway would end up being a hit show. I certainly didn't.
What did it originate from? Like, was it the Parsons students at first?
No.
It wasn't. Okay.
The producers of the show, Jane Lipsitz and Dan Cutforth, called me in January of 2004, and they introduced themselves, and they said they were doing this new show about fashion, and that people in the industry said that they should talk to me. So I asked them for more details, and when I heard fashion reality, I said, you know, this industry has enough trouble without that. I'm really not interested. They said, well, give us 10 minutes. So I Googled them and found out that they were the Project Greenlight producers, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, about making movies. I thought, well, that's a show that has a seriousness of purpose and integrity, and, well, let's see what the conversation is like. So I really liked them and what they had to say, and they wanted to use real fashion designers, not pick people at random off the street saying, well, we'll make you into a fashion designer. And I got excited about the whole idea. 3 to 4 months went by. I didn't hear a thing from them, and I thought, okay, whatever. Then I heard from them. They said, we really want you to be our consultant, and I should add unpaid, as was my role for the first 2 years. I didn't think anyone got paid for reality television. So I signed on to this project, which was much bigger than I had actually been able to wrap my brain around, but that's understandable.
I mean, talk about a role that is like the perfect fit for you, down to like your ethos and what you're all about, right?
Well, I should add, though, during all this consulting and planning, my role in the show didn't exist. There was no role.
You ended up almost being like the host of the show, right? Or you were the guy that was always there, like commenting on the designs and being like, make it work, and like, here's the amount of time you have left.
Well,
gosh,
it happened this way. It's today. The designers are arriving tomorrow. So the producers came to me, and I could tell they were uneasy. Mm-hmm. They asked me, how would you feel about going into the workroom and asking the designers what they're doing? And I said, well, it's how I've spent most of my life. Easy. And I was very aware of the camera placement. There was a camera on me, there was a camera on the designer. And I thought, all right, I get it. As long as I have the designer responding to me, no one needs to see me, no one needs to hear my voice. And I, honest to God, never dreamed I'd be in the cut of the show.
Like, you have such a natural charisma, you were funny. They probably thought, we got to keep him in.
Well, and I have to say, I didn't know what the show would actually look like. I mean, I knew my role in it, and I knew what happened on the runway with the judging. I didn't know what was going on at the Atlas Apartments. I thought maybe this is all about sexual escapades. Who knows? And there was one taping. I was always in the Parsons Auditorium during the judging, and I would say in the literal and metaphorical dark. And there's a woman standing next to me in the literal and metaphorical dark, and I didn't know who she was, and it was early in the season, so this person certainly didn't know who I was, and we're watching the judging, and she turns to me and she whispers, who's going to want to watch this? I said, oh God. I said, you are corroborating my worst fears, that this is just going to be so boring, and it'll be like watching paint dry. Not
what anybody wants to hear when they're just starting out. Oh.
So after the taping that day, I asked someone, who is that grumpy woman? The president of Bravo.
Oh, great.
Lauren Zelaznik.
Oh, gosh. Well, I feel like there's a lot of nerves that go into like a new show, right? So giving her some credit there, yeah.
So I never dreamed there'd be a season 2, let alone the last season Heidi and I did together was season 16.
How quickly, though, into this season and into maybe watching back the episodes as they were rolling out, were you like, oh, this is going to be a hit?
Again, in all sincerity, I never dreamed there'd be a season 2, and we weren't picked up right away either. And then there was all this anxiety about season 2, and I'll tell you why. And would never have occurred to me. The anxiety was all from the producers and the network, because with season 1, when we're casting the show, when we're looking for designers, nobody knew what it was. So they came unencumbered with what the show's actually about. For season 2, we've shown our hand. The cards are all out on the table. So they did know what the show was about. And there was just tremendous concern that this meant that there would be contrivances and expectations that we would have to meet in a certain way. But then by season 3, and then 4 and 5, all that dissipated.
I'm curious, because you were very known, as I kind of said before, for your make it work catchphrase. How did that come to be? Is that just something you said and all of a sudden people were like, oh, I like that he says this all the time?
I can tell you when I first said it. I first said it in a fashion class. The year was 2001, 2002. I was working with seniors. It was a 6-hour-a-week class in concept development for 30 weeks. It was fall and spring semester. I had a student who had been working on this since September. It's now April, so we have a month and a half to go. And she said to me, I'm changing everything. What are you talking about, you're changing everything? I don't like it anymore. I said, you've been working on this since September. You've been working on this for months. What's the problem? She said, I don't know, and she's shrugging. I just don't like it. I said, well, you know what you're going to do? You're going to sit here. You're going to offer a diagnosis of what it is that's wrong and what it is you want to fix. And then you're going to offer up a prescription for how to make it work. I said, you're not abandoning this. And I said, also, this is for your sake. If I let you just drop this and start all over again, what will you really know about what went wrong? But if you have to offer up a diagnosis and a prescription for making it work, think of what you now have in your own physical and mental toolbox.
Right.
Problem-solving skills that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
You are the perfect example for what a teacher should be, because not only are you a visionary for how a school and department should operate in the most effective way, but you also are the type of person that takes such an individual interest in someone.
Well, thank you. It's what I mean. That's what I would do. I would really channel them, and I'm not an enabler. I mean, I'm someone who wants to. I mean, I don't like throwing up roadblocks, but at the same time, I know what's best. I mean, I think I know what's best. Not always.
You're doing whatever it takes to help them kind of push through what they're going through, and there's different kind of tactics on doing that. You know what I think you always got a lot of credit for on the show as well was you were always so good at delivering certain news in a positive way, and I feel like that is what makes a really good leader, and that's what makes a good mentor. So I'm curious, like even for me, like as somebody that manages a team, like what is your advice to us for how to properly manage?
With bad news, I rehearse it in my head, and I think, how would I react to this message if it were delivered in this way? And if it's very negative, then I rethink. Mm-hmm. But it's about thinking about how's that person going to react to this. And I have to say, my critiques on Project Runway evolved in the following way. Mm-hmm. I went from telling the designers things to pummeling them with enough questions that they would see what I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. I would take the designer away from that camera and bring them around to where I'm standing and say, I want you to see it from my point of view. Mm-hmm. Look at this garment and tell me what you see. Mm-hmm. Oh, I see what you're talking about, or what you mean. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hem is really janky.
Right.
So if they see it and I don't have to say it, it's music to my ears. I couldn't be happier. And people have asked me too, do I feel guilty when a designer goes home? Why? Well, is there something you should or shouldn't have said to them? I said, you know, I don't think about it that way. Just as I would never consider taking credit if they win. No, you have to disassociate yourself from that.
I love how you've said, and I was reading about this and I noted it down because I was like, that's so interesting. One of your ethos that you've talked about fashion-wise is that fashion should be expressive but also functional.
Yeah. I had a dear friend, now departed. She was at Vogue for 37 years, the last 17 of which she was editor-in-chief before Anna Wintour, Grace Mirabella. But I brought her in every September to meet with the new fashion students, and she knew why. I said, I want you to do your Grace thing. And people would look at her and think, who's this old lady? And she was an old lady, but a very chic one. She would tell them enthusiastically that they're the future and fashion needs them. And she would add, I have 2 pieces of advice. Don't make dumb clothes and don't make jokes. So they'd be looking at each other. Grace, tell them what you mean. Dumb clothes. No one needs you to design a t-shirt. There are plenty of them out there. Don't go there. Now, this is Grace's particular point of view, not necessarily mine. Jokes. She said the things that walk the runways during Paris Couture Week. She said, think about what is between dumb clothes and jokes. There's a huge playing field, and there are not many people who design well for it. It's usually dumb or a joke. And I took that to heart in my own way as a teacher in the fashion department, and I would say to my students, I don't care what you design, and I really didn't, as long as your model can get into a taxi.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's oftentimes, you see a lot of outfits on the runway where I'm like, well, it doesn't. But I guess runway fashion's very different because they're throwing a ton of layers on them often, right?
Yeah, it is. At the same time, I have respect for the couture collections, but I think fashion should be accessible.
What do you think is the secret to looking effortlessly chic walking around New York City?
I have a mantra about this. Has nothing to do with individual items of apparel. It's about the following: silhouette, proportion, and fit. Silhouette, proportion, and fit pertains to anything. An evening gown, a tuxedo, workout clothes. You want clothes that follow your natural silhouette, that don't cascade away from you or squeeze you like a wetsuit. Proportion, I'm always talking about thirds, and you epitomize this too. You're 1/3 on top, 2/3 on the bottom. We don't want to cut ourselves in half, which is why I object so vehemently to men and the untucked shirt, as they're cutting themselves in half. And it's not a pleasing proportion, and you just look broader, wider, you look dumpier. And that pertains to fit. It's the same thing, clothes that actually fit us. I'm not a fan of the baggy jeans. Or baggy clothes in general. I just think we look like an unmade bed. It's not a flattering look.
I do really like that the more tailored look is having a resurgence too, because I agree. Like, I even remember when I was at FIT, and I was not at FIT, when I was taking classes there as a high schooler, I took a lot of fashion design classes, and my favorite eras to draw inspiration from were always the 50s and the 60s. Yeah. I am so obsessed with that style of clothes, and I always have been, that it's so fun now seeing that make a resurgence, and even like the little bobbed hair and, the capri pants for women and loafers. Like, it's amazing because it's so classic and it's so like Americana.
No, it's you're absolutely right. But it's fashion's pendulum. The bagginess is going to come back.
It's going to come back, yeah. Isn't that interesting? Like, fashion really has a way of just re-coming back.
Well, it's the culture of retail, too. They want us to buy new things, and they want us to believe that we're out of style if we don't have these new things. And I really believe in finding a uniform. And just sticking with it.
I love that. I think also, like, as I've gotten older, it's like when you're younger and you want to be trendy, you want the fast fashion, the cute going out outfits. And now I feel like as soon as you get to like a certain, like, your later 20s, it's like you're an adult and it's time to, like, no more crop tops, no more ripped jeans. Like, let's, really tailor it. And it's been fun because then you start buying pieces that you'll have forever.
And also you have this, you'll have this confidence because you look your best.
Mm-hmm. I know you've talked before about things that have changed within the world of fashion. So I'm curious, like, what do you think has changed for the better in the world of fashion? And what do you think still needs work?
While I like the notion that fashion can be affordable and accessible, and I think it should be, there's too much of it. Mm-hmm. There's just too much stuff out there. and it's so wasteful, and it's so bad for the environment. And the last class that I taught at Emerson was a course in fashion and sustainability, and the premise was to help solve this dilemma. How do we get people to stop buying so much stuff? I think people probably know what I have the most disdain for, but now it's ubiquitous, so what do I know? How did the legging become a pant?
I know. Look at me right now.
You're in workout wear.
But this is completely workout wear right now for me. Yes.
You're not going to the opera.
No. Very much so not. Wait, I just have to call out really quickly for our listeners. Okay, Tim and I are sitting across from each other, and I wish I came dressed up. This is like so embarrassing for me running interview show, I'm always in workout wear, but you guys that know me see me on Instagram, you see my posts. I love dressing cute when I can, but yeah, like my uniform, because of the running interview show, has become like workout wear, and the brand that I wear all the time is Adidas because that's our partner. But we are sitting across from each other, and Tim is in the most perfect, you guys know how brown is the color right now. Everybody's obsessed with chocolate brown, just all shades of brown, and you are wearing the most perfect outfit.
Oh, you're too kind.
Got a
Thank
perfect
you.
light brown turtleneck sweater on, pants that are, what material is it?
It's tweed.
Tweed pants that have like little specks of color, but they're brown, and then like the perfect loafers. So
Thank you.
Your outfit is and
I'm not crazy about my socks. They're way too dark, but that's the only socks I could find.
That's funny.
On the topic of what I have the most disdain for, it goes back to my theory about not my theory, my adage about the monkey house at the zoo. When you first enter the monkey house at the zoo, you shriek, "This place stinks." And after about 20 minutes, you think, it's not so bad. And after another 10 minutes, you think, what smell? But anyone new walking into the monkey house shrieks, "This place stinks." You know this was the case with leggings. Someone put on a pair of leggings, walked by the mirror and said, I can't go out dressed like this. 20 minutes later, they walk by and they think, it's not so bad. And 10 minutes later, they walk by the mirror and they say, I look hot.
No, leggings really are a phenomenon. And I was asking one of my friends who's a stylist in the city, and I said to her, what do you think is the style of our generation, right? Because you can look back to the 80s and it's the big hairs and the big sleeves.
Oh, the 80s were the worst.
Right. The 90s were so chic with like the emperor cut dresses and just so many different styles. And then I said the 60s and 70s I loved. It's like the tailored outfits, the pencil skirts. And I was like, what do you think it is for us? And she goes, it's athleisure.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is such a bummer. That is athleisure. But it is. Like for our generation, it really was athleisure. And I do think like Gen Z and Gen Alpha are bringing back different styles right now. And you don't see them as frequently in athleisure. But yeah, it is interesting. It's very street style.
And I'll add this about what's good. I'm speaking from a viewpoint of a New Yorker. You can wear anything here, absolutely anything. And no one looks askance. And I think that's a very positive thing, as opposed to what I said earlier about the very narrowly defined aesthetic swath that America used to be. Mm-hmm. If you didn't fit into this mold, you just didn't fit in. And here, at least, I don't know what it's like in Kansas City, but here you can wear anything, mm-hmm. and the world accepts you. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing.
It is just a place where everything is acceptable and nothing is looked down upon.
And I'll add this about the responsibility that each of us has for how we present ourselves to the world. It's the semiotics of clothes and grooming. How we present ourselves to the world is how the world judges us. And when people say to me with frequency, oh, that's so shallow, that's so judgmental, but it's true. You know, when you walk into a restaurant, how do you know who works there versus who a patron is? It's by how they're dressed.
Going off of that, I just want to do a couple like life reflections, because you have lived an incredible life. Like it is just so amazing for me to be sitting here in front of you, somebody that's accomplished so much. And like, I can only like dream of accomplishing as much as you have. And I hope that I will, but seriously, it is so...
You will vastly surpass me.
It is so inspirational,
you know,
seriously.
The most important thing is, Kate, just to do whatever you're doing at 150%, and just to move forward and then see what happens. Young people ask me this all the time. How do I get to be famous? Well, what do you want to be famous for? Oh, I don't care. You don't? Well, you should care. Mm-hmm. If you're chasing it, it eludes you. You never get it. You just have to do a really good.
Yeah. My dad used to say it to me with sports. It's like, you're not chasing an accolade. You're chasing being the best you can possibly be at your sport. And then the accolades come.
Dad is completely
Right.
1,000% correct.
And it applies to everything.
And also as an athlete, and I'm reflecting upon my childhood years as a competitive swimmer, someone's going to come in first, second, and third. And I was always fourth, fifth, sixth. It didn't get me down. It made me train harder, work harder. And the first time that I came in third, I still remember that day and that yellow ribbon. It was so thrilling, and I was ecstatic. And it said to me, if you really work at this, it can happen. As opposed to, don't cry, sweetie, here's a ribbon. No, work hard. And then be proud of what you've achieved.
Absolutely. And looking back on your life, like, did you ever imagine you'd become this pop culture icon in the world of fashion?
Never in a zillion years. Never. And I still don't acknowledge anything even close to that.
Right.
For me, the humbling, maybe it's not humbling, I don't know, the whiff of fresh air that I get is every time I'm in my kitchen, because I'm in it a lot and it's open, so I see it, is seeing my Emmy Award. I mean, I think, oh my God, I have an Emmy Award.
Right.
This is unbelievable.
It's such a testament to hard work and just being yourself.
Just
and
being yourself.
Really
Yeah.
being yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many of our listeners are creatives, entrepreneurs, people in the city just trying to make it happen. I'm curious, can you leave us with one final piece of advice?
Make it work.
Let's go. Make it work.
Make it work.
All right. Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on Post Run High with me today.
Kate, thank you. And you're a fantastic therapist.
Really? Did you feel like you were in a therapy session a little
Yes.
bit? Talking about yourself is therapeutic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like going back to the early years.
Yeah.
And,
You took me on a journey I haven't been on for decades.
oh my gosh. Well, I'm so happy I got to go on that journey with you. Seriously. Like, I just want to your amazing hand hug.